Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Memorial Day Wankathon, Guitar Wank. Lots going on here. I just want you to know that while we've all been quarantined and byzantined and mezzanined, basically I've been consumed with how to entertain you, how to inform you, and how to inspire you. Well, my cohorts, Troy's been busy harvesting toilet paper, and Scott's been busy recycling it. I've been just consumed with creating content for you to make your life, if not more miserable, just better. And so, I want to let you know, first of all, the Grumps TV, a twice-weekly TV show. I'm going to do my 18th episode on Wednesday. That means that we're into like our third season in Netflix years. You can get it on my YouTube channel, Bruce Forman. Please subscribe. I'm about to hit 1,000, and something magical supposedly happens then. Also, I'm doing first chorus of the day on my Instagram account. That is, I walk into my shed and I just play a chorus, record it, and send it out to all of you, warts and all. I just pick a tune and go, and I've been getting requests. It's been a lot of fun. I do it every day. My Instagram account is @Formanism, Formanism. Now, for you Patreon supporters of Guitar Wank, and there's not enough of you, but we really appreciate the ones you are, I have been doing the Wank Minute. And what that is I'll take something that really changed my life, some idea, some lick, some phrase, whatever, some experience, and I'll talk about it and just hand it to you in a minute and let you run with it, because basically I'm still working on it too. And that's available to all our Guitar Wank supporters, so why don't you consider doing that? Next, I have a new My Music Masterclass video out. It's going to come out today, so it's the number 10. It's called Hunker in the Bunker, and basically that's kind of the way I'm just went through how I've been working on music while I've had time to be alone and really think about it. There's 10 of them there. They're there for your enjoyment and for your edification, and if you want to eat them too, that's good. So there you go. That's what I've been doing while others have been harvesting toilet paper, recycling toilet paper, or smoking it. So with that, I'm going to turn you over. Yeah, I'm going to turn you over. Anyways, and then Troy will put on some wankage that we have been carefully archiving for your personal pain and pleasure. Wank on.
Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate it, mate. Welcome, guys, to another Guitar Wank episode. We've been a little bit behind the 8 ball with just crazy shit going on, but we're back into it. This is episode 211. We've got a great episode today because I've been wanting to get this guy on the show for a long time, and yeah. It's kind of funny. He lives so far away. He lives next door. But anyway, Eric Singer, the drummer from Kiss. I mean, who isn't a Kiss fan, man? Who didn't grow up with Kiss? So we've got Eric on the show. I've been dying to hear his story and how do you get into Kiss? How do you do that? Anyway, so really excited to present that to you guys. Of course, you heard Bruce and what he's doing with his show and the new video and everything going on there. And also doing Guitar Wank Minute, which will be for the Patreon members, so we give you guys something a little special. We hope you're all safe and sound and keeping well in these crazy times. So sit back, enjoy the show, and we'll see you guys all soon. All right, thanks, guys. Bye.
A couple minutes late because I loaded my car up now, so after I'm done here, I'm going to go just put gas in it. That way I have to do another thing in the morning for a Modern Drummer. They're doing a live webcasting at 11 o'clock our time,
right?
2 Eastern. For Modern Drummer, I'm doing it like with Nico McBrain from Iron Maiden, the drummer.
Yeah.
So we're doing a thing together, like a, I guess, hard rock, heavy metal roundtable thing or something. Originally I was going to do it with a couple drummers, but I guess he's only going to just do it with Nico and myself.
Right. So,
this is a cool little studio. How's it sounding here when you get stuff?
It's good, man. It sounds great in here. But, you know, it's always a work in progress, but, you know, I just have all my gear in here and just... I haven't recorded drums in here before, but I've done other instruments. Well, actually, done small kits. But other instruments...
That's all you need. And when you record, that's all you need. What is that, like an acolyte snare, or what is it?
God, man, I don't even know.
I don't think... It could be a Black Beauty. Is it a Black Beauty?
Might be a Black Beauty.
I can't tell. It's metal, right?
Yeah.
It looks like it might...
So, yeah.
I mean, usually that's all you need. Although there's so many other drums that people don't realize. Everyone's get used to thinking like, oh, have a Ludwig kit or get a Ludwig Black Beauty. There's so many other drums that are, as long as it's chrome over brass, usually, and most of them sound good. Pearl made some in the 70s really great ones, and you can get those for cheap, $250.
Oh,
they
wow.
sound great. Oh, yeah, that's what Stuart Copeland used on all the Police records.
Yeah.
All those Police records they called it a Pearl Jupiter snare. It's a chrome over brass Pearl snare drum. That's what Stuart Copeland used forever. But he was a Tom and Dorsey, so he never really talks about it. Eventually, they made his own signature drum, which they tried to copy that Pearl one. But the Pearl one is what's on all those records.
Yeah, I think I paid maybe $1,100 for it, and it's got one more tom.
Oh, cool.
And, you know, I just wanted something in the studio that we could use for ideas and stuff. And
no, it's fine, because if you put some mics further away,
yeah,
you can get some, some natural, room ambience.
Room and stuff.
Is it loud in here? I mean, I heard you playing a few times, but I don't really notice it much.
When I close everything up and the curtains, it kind of sounds like your drum room. You can kind of hear it.
I think my drum room's probably a little more denser because I floated.
You haven't got this.
I floated the walls in there.
Ah, that's a huge difference too.
On the studs, I put that Z-bar.
Yep.
So then you mount the walls to that, so they're floated off the studs, and then I hung carpet.
Yep.
On all the walls. So you have hard surfaces. If you muted it a little bit, you want to get some reflection to get ambience. But if you muted it more, you wouldn't get. I was not looking to record. I was looking to get. Right.
Well, man, I've been dying to hear your story. I mean, God, Kiss. Everyone grew up with Kiss. It's one of the biggest rock and roll bands in the fucking world,
including me. I grew up on it too. So that's the irony of the thing for me.
That's great. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio.
Right.
Actually, a suburb called Euclid on the east side, but basically it's Cleveland because when you ask people where they're from, you usually associate yourself with the sports teams and the main city.
Yeah.
Because when we went to concerts, the concerts were all in downtown Cleveland at that time. And in the 70s, they used to have what they call a World Series of Rock, the big stadium concerts at the old football and baseball stadium where the Cleveland Browns and Cleveland Indians used to play.
Wow. So I better introduce you.
Okay, no problem.
I haven't even started the show.
Okay.
Welcome, GuitarWank viewers. Finally, we have someone who's been wanting to get on the show for a long time. Eric Singer, drummer from Kiss. Neighbour. Been wanting to get you on the show for a while and find out the deal. And man, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really, really awesome.
You've had some of my other friends on here besides Frank DeVito.
Frankie DeVito. We had you know Joe Bonamassa.
Yeah, I know Joe very well, of course.
Yeah, we had Joe on. Robin Ford. Who else we had? Marvin Smitty Smith. Do you know him?
Oh yeah, he's great. Marvin's an amazing drummer. Robin Ford played on the Kiss record. I don't know if you know
did?
that. Yeah, Creatures of the Night. I think he played on the solo for the song I Still Love You, I think.
Wow.
But you might have to double check it.
Yep. That
was a record when Ace Frehley had basically, even though he's pictured on the album cover, he had left the band and they used different studio guys to play all the different, Rick Derringer, I think Robin Ford, Vinnie Vincent, I'm trying to remember who else might have played on it. I think the guitar player from Mr. Mister.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I can't remember his name. Is it Steve something?
Is Steve Farris?
Steve Farris, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, man. So you grew up in Cleveland?
Cleveland, Ohio.
Wow.
Right.
And when did you start drums? When did you get on the kit?
My father was a band leader, and my mother was a singer and played violin as well. So my parents were musicians and musical.
Yeah.
And my older brother and older sister, they played piano and took lessons from the Cleveland Institute of Music when they were little. But for some reason, when I came along, they didn't have me play piano and follow suit. I don't know why. Maybe they just got tired of driving them downtown to the Institute on Saturday mornings. And eventually, I think my dad, basically you had to play an instrument. It wasn't really a choice, but I just always liked drums, probably from watching the Ed Sullivan Show in the 60s and seeing, of course, the Beatles in 1964. At that time, I was like, when they were on the show, I think I was like 6.5 years old.
Well, you remember it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody remembered that because it was big, and girls screaming. And then, of course, all the other bands that were on the show, Rolling Stones, and the Dave Clark Five, I remember them because Dave Clark was the drummer and the leader of the band, his name was on the bass drum, and he had a red Sparkle Rogers drum kit. So I was always fascinated by that kit, and I think that's probably part of the reason I ended up. My first good kit was a Rogers drum kit that I got for my 14th birthday, a Silver Sparkle kit in 1972. But my first kit ever was a Blue Sparkle Dixie drum set, which were made by Pearl.
Right.
And ironically, that's what I play now. I've played Pearl since 1986, so it's kind of ironic that I started on Pearl and ended up playing Pearl most of my life.
Wow. So you were just playing, you grew up playing local bands and stuff like that?
Well, I played in my dad's band. My dad was a band leader, what they call like a society band leader. So, which means you played more for like high society, what they call like, rich people.
Right.
Basically rich people's country club parties, their debutante parties when they would introduce their daughter to society.
Yeah.
We would play every year for the Metropolitan Opera when they would come to town. They would come to town for a week and do a residency at Cleveland Public Hall. My dad would play for the opening night and then play every night. And then the final opera ball would be on the Saturday night, when the night of closing. And I started doing that when I was 14, playing in my dad's band.
So you were playing a lot back then?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And we played, I played for a couple of different presidents when they'd come to the town, like a President Ford or Reagan, Carter.
Yeah.
I remember it was pretty funny in 1980 when Ronald Reagan ran against Jimmy Carter for president. My dad got hired to play for their debate. They were having the big national debate in Cleveland. So my dad's band got hired to play, ironically, for both candidates. So I played for President Carter because he was president at the time. So I remember we had to come through the kitchen, Secret Service, opened all my drums up, went through all my stuff to make sure no weapons and all that kind of thing. And halfway through the gig, my dad took off and went to the other hotel which became President Reagan. He was the candidate then, and he went and played for his party. So he was double dipping.
Wow.
When it comes to people don't choose political sides when it comes to work,
Yeah, right.
It's like Michael Jordan said, his famous saying was Republicans buy sneakers too. So basically he was saying, I'm not getting involved in politics. I play basketball, I'm a businessman, and some people always got mad that he didn't become more socially active, but some people just go, hey, I'm not a politician. You're not obligated to do it. You should do it if you feel like you want to do it, I think. And so my dad was kind of that way, even though I knew what his political leanings were, but when it came to work, he didn't care. He didn't get involved with that stuff.
So you were playing a lot as a kid, like pretty...
Yeah.
And all types of stuff?
Yeah, well... Mostly we played, all what they call the American Songbook, which would be like, Gershwin, Cole Porter, all the show tunes from all the musicals. Yeah. But then I'd play every kind of ethnic thing, whether it was, Oktoberfest, playing German polkas or Hungarian events with, playing Hungarian Czardas or an Italian thing or a bar mitzvah for some kid, So I knew all the ethnic music of all the different types of nationalities. And Cleveland's a pretty big melting pot. You'd have a Slovenian home, a German Hofbrauhaus, an Italian home, or there was a lot of Slovenes and Czechoslovakians and Eastern Europeans living in Cleveland, a big contingency. But we played mainly a lot of country club type parties. So we'd play more of like, I would call they call it society music. My dad used to refer to himself kind of as the poor man's Freddie Martin, if you know what Freddie Martin sounded like. He had like all these saxophones playing in unison with these unison vibratos, kind of it's kind of more of an older, cornier sound by today's standards, but it was a sound. My dad was a lot older. He was born in 1909. Oh, wow. And so he graduated, he moved here to America he immigrated from Germany when he was 12. And so when he graduated, he started touring with this band out of Cleveland named Freddie Carlone.
Okay.
It was a big band. Back then, you know, there was no other kinds of bands except big bands and dance bands.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that was the band my dad was touring with in 1935.
What was he playing?
My dad played violin, and he also played saxophone, tenor sax. Well, he played tenor, alto, and clarinet, and he even played a little drums. Oh, wow. But his main thing was violin.
Right.
From when he was 5, but he also would play tenor sax.
Yep.
And in that first band, Perry Como was the singer. And that was Perry Como's first gig. So my dad was in the band with him for like 2 years, and he said they used to go on double dates. He had a 32 Ford coupe with a rumble seat, which means the trunk opens up and it's a seat.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said they used to go on double dates. And I think my aunt might have gone out with him, but I never knew the real story because I was too young to get the full story. My dad was a lot older when he got married. So
did he marry? Where was your mum from?
She was from Cleveland.
She was from Cleveland.
Yeah, she was local.
And he was whereabouts in Germany?
Well, he was from what they called the old Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So they were called with Donauschwaben. Donauschwaben were Germans that lived in the Austro-Hungarian territory. Now, if you look on a map today, that's West Germany.
Right.
But the country zones were much different in 1909 when he was born. You know, he was born during World War I.
Yeah.
And he told me stories when he was a little kid that the Slovenian soldiers came right through and they would just take all your animals. You know, they'd come through and just pick up your sheep and your lamb, just grab whatever they wanted, you know, kind of like rape and pillage, basically.
Yeah.
So, of course, people wanted to come to America for a better life, and eventually they came here, he came here in 1921.
Wow.
And then eventually, like, you know, in those days, people did it the right way.
Yeah.
You know, they did it proper through immigration with proper papers through Ellis Island. And then when they wanted to bring their other family members over, the laws clearly state that you're supposed to provide a job and a place for people to live.
Yep.
You know, instead of this chain migration. You're allowed to bring family members, but you had to have a job for them and a place. So they sponsored other family members and people from their town, and they gave them jobs. My grandparents were tailors. They had a tailor shop.
Wow.
And my aunt worked there too. My dad was, I don't know how he just got into music and was only a musician his whole life. Yeah. But my aunt worked at the tailor shop with my grandparents.
Right.
And then my grandfather died at a young age, and so my grandmother got remarried, and the guy she married had been a baker. He had a bakery shop called Haller's Bakery, but he retired really young at like 42 or 45.
Right.
Because he had done real well for himself. So my family had done, you know, they came here and did the American dream. They built their businesses and lives up and did, you know, it was the land of opportunity, and they were able to make that opportunity work for them. So,
wow, that's super cool.
Yeah, so I'm a first generation American.
Okay. Yeah, and the singer was your.
Well, my last name was really Mensinger. So
okay.
Which is a German name.
Yep.
My dad shortened it because it sounded. His name was Johnny Singer, so it sounded easier to say and less ethnic.
Yeah,
which is what a lot of people do.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
Like Gene Simmons was really Chaim Witz.
Yep.
And then he changed. Then it was Americanized to Gene Klein, but he changed it to Gene Simmons. You know, like Gene always said to me, you know, you don't choose your name when you're born. You can decide to change it and choose it whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
When you're able to, and you make that choice. You know, but you know, Gene's always, you know, and I'm in agreement with him. Sometimes if you have such an ethnic sounding name, at least in America, it doesn't always work.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially in entertainment.
Especially back then too. Right.
You know, you think of Tony Curtis, his real name was Bernard Schwartz. You know, most entertainers changed their names because they had ethnic names.
Yeah, yeah. So you were playing drums with your dad, and at what point did you venture out of that and get into more of your own thing? Or
well, I had friends, of course. You know, once I heard, I mean, I was always into rock and roll. I had an older sister. I do have an older sister, Monique, and she was 4 years older. So of course, and being a girl, girls, you know, end up liking, you know, boy bands and all that stuff. So she went crazy about the Beatles and all that. But she would bring home records, you know, Chicago, Sly and the Family Stone, Supremes, Temptations, Raspberries. I'm trying to think of some of all the records that she had. And so I got exposed to probably a lot of music that maybe I might have discovered it later, who knows. But I directly credit her with a lot of the influence, a lot of that stuff, hearing it at a young age. And so that exposed me to music. And I think, I remember we moved to a different part of town when I was going into the 6th grade. And the kids in this new school, was the same city. It was just a different elementary school, different part of town. But for some reason, all these kids were way more into rock and roll. They were into like Led Zeppelin and all that stuff. And I remember we started a band in 6th grade.
Yeah.
And we had 2 drummers even, because the other kid was a friend of mine and he played drums. So I kind of figured, well, I'll just have, we'll both play drums. We'll take turns and stuff. But it was it was just for fun.
Yeah.
But then by the time I got into high school, I'd met, some other kids from other junior highs. Then you're all we had a big high school, like 3,000 kids. So I met some other kids that were really good musicians and started jamming with them. One of my friends, his name was Mike McGill. His brother was in my 10th grade class, and Mike was in 9th grade, still in junior high. And his brother said, oh, you got to hear my brother play guitar. He's really good, blah, 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 blah. So he hooked me up to start jamming with him. And he and I had a bunch of different bands through high school and stuff, and even after high school. And so I never played in cover bands.
Oh, wow, never?
I never. I only, my dad, I played those gigs, but I never played in cover bands. Always was in original bands.
Yep.
And because I always wanted to play, my own music, create your own music with people. And it just so happened that the guys that I met, that's what they wanted to do as well. They didn't get into that cover band circuit.
Band scene,
And then, eventually I realized that the Cleveland scene wasn't, it's really great, a lot of great musicians. They always were supportive of breaking a lot of bands nationally, but nobody local. They weren't really supportive of the local scene as much as you would have hoped and liked.
Yeah.
Even though it's called the Rock and Roll Capital, the Hall of Fame's there and all that stuff. And so I just realized I got kind of disillusioned with Cleveland. And I made the plan in early '83. I had been married at the time. I knew I was getting divorced, so I just waited till I got divorced. And in the interim, I just was woodshedding constantly every day practicing. And I shipped my drums out to here, California. My mother was living here. And I shipped the drums to her warehouse in Orange County. And once I got divorced, a week later, I got in my car and I drove across country. And
wow,
I didn't know anybody when I moved here. I didn't know anything about the music scene. I literally came in blind and green as you could be. But I've always figured that you got to be a chameleon in life, and if you got to learn to adapt and change your colors and adapt to the environment. And I just always had the point of view that you should always go into every situation with open eyes and open ears, because you're going to learn a lot if you are receptive to that and aware.
Yeah.
And back then you didn't have any internet and stuff like that. You had a place called the Musicians Contact Service, where you went into this place in Hollywood. They advertised in the back of these local rock magazines. There was BAM magazine and Music Connection.
Music Connection, yeah.
And in the back of there, they would advertise. So you go and sign up there and put your name in and say, that you're looking for a gig or whatever. And they had a bulletin board, and that's where I found this local band. And of course, everybody, it's Hollywood, so everybody inflates what's really going on. They make it seem like they got all this stuff happening and they're about to get a record deal. This band said, oh, we're working with George Tutko, who was a known producer at the time. He had worked with Rod Stewart and Cheap Trick and other people like that. And we're just finishing up our demo and ready to do a video, and like making it sound like they had label interest and had some important or known people working with them.
Yep.
And the guitar player did know George Tutko, but they didn't have the things going on. Then they weren't ready at the place that they mentioned. But I figured, hey, you got to start somewhere. They were good musicians. The singer had a really good voice, kind of like a Mickey Thomas, that high tenor of Jefferson Starship type voice. And the bass player was, they were all really good. The guitar player was a really good guitar player. He was kind of into Gary Moore. I'm not going to say he was that level, but, there was a lot of good guitar players in LA at that time.
Yeah,
no disrespect, but they were a dime a dozen.
Yeah.
The best guitar players where you came from, everybody was that good when you got out here. Literally hundreds and thousands of guys were that. You're like, holy shit, everybody's great. And we're all very good.
Yep.
So I joined that band, and then after a while, I kind of realized that I just felt like no disrespect, but I could tell I was way more hungry, way more focused, and way more serious. I always said to everybody, I was serious as a heart attack. Yeah. And that's how I looked at it. I really was like tunnel vision about what I wanted to do and what my intentions were. And so Carmine Appice, the drummer, was doing those drum contests.
Yeah.
And at that time, that was before Guitar Center was doing them. Well, Carmine was doing them through Guitar Center, but he was sponsored by Pearl Drums and Mattel. the toy company, they had these electronic drums called Synsonics. And
Yep.
Carmine had great sponsorship, and he was a famous drummer. So he went around the country doing those things. And so I entered the one here, and I made the finals, and they were at the Palace. And at that time, it was a big deal. I mean, they would sell out a 1,000-seat club,
Wow.
a little theater, for just a drum contest.
Yep.
And all the judges were famous guys like Steve Smith from Journey, and Myron Grombacher from Pat Benatar, and Bruce Gary, the drummer from the Knack, and the Go-Go's drummer, Gina Shotgun. I forget all the other ones, but there was a lot of who's who at the time of drummers. Everybody you'd seen on MTV, all of a sudden you're playing, and Steve Smith's like where you are when I'm playing, and that's pretty intimidating,
huge.
And especially when you an inexperienced kid from the Midwest. And but from that video, some girl got my number from Carmine. She called me up and said, "Hey, I got your number from Carmine. I'm doing this video for Playboy called Women of Rock, and you want to be in the video, and I've got the guitar player from Steeler, the guitar." That was the band Yngwie Malmsteen was in.
Oh,
He had just left that band and joined a band called Alcatraz.
Yeah.
So this was the guy that took his place, a guy named Kurt James, who was great.
Wow.
And the bass player had played with Lita Ford. So we went to rehearse at the rehearsal place, and the bass player said to me, "Hey, my girlfriend's really good friends with Lita Ford, and her drummer, who was Randy Castillo at the time, who went on to play with Ozzy, he goes, Randy just quit, and she's going to need a drummer. I think you'd be really good for her. I'm going to recommend you to her." And so he recommended me and got me an audition. And that's kind of, by being seen at that drum contest, that became the chain link. I call it the chain link fence.
Yeah.
Everybody I met since that point to this day has been connected to the previous people or situation. So I auditioned for Lita in a cattle call, and I got the gig. And then all of a sudden, I mean, literally, like 6 weeks before that, I was in that drum contest. 6 weeks later, we're playing Long Beach Arena on New Year's Eve, opening for Rat for 15,000 people.
Yep.
And Carmine Appice comes to the gig, and he sees me, and I go up to him, "Hey, Carmine," he goes, "Hey, what are you doing here?" I go, "I'm playing with Lita." And he goes, "Wow, that's great." He goes, and Carmine's always been cool, and we've become good friends since then. And he said, "Eric, that's exactly what that drum contest is all about. It's about people creating opportunities so people can get discovered." I think the year before the contest, the drummer that won it the year before was a guy named Sonny Emery, who went on to play with Jean-Luc Ponty and Earth, Wind & Fire, and became amazing drummer. He won the contest the year before. The guy that won the contest the year that I was in is a guy named Sal Rodriguez. Sal plays with War, the band War.
Okay.
And he's been playing with them for over 20 years. And
wow.
So I don't remember what happened to the other guys from that contest, because there was, I know Steven Adler was in the contest, but he didn't make the final. This is 1984, so this is way before Guns N' Roses. Everyone even knew who they were. He didn't make the finals, but I remember meeting him then.
Yep.
But he was in the semifinals. I remember that at Guitar Center, the old Guitar Center in Sherman Oaks.
Yep.
But anyways, that started my journey. So I always give thanks to all the people that gave me the opportunities at the beginning, like Ray Marzano, the guy that got me hooked up to audition for Lita, and Lita hired me on my first gig. And
how long will you live with Lita for?
Probably a little over a year.
That's
and in
cool.
the time we started doing demos, and I did pre-production a few different times for a record that ended up not getting ever made. Well, at least while I was in the band. She was engaged to Tony Iommi at the time, and Tony had seen me playing with her, and then one day Lita called me up and said, "Hey, Tony wants to know if you want to play on some demos." So I started playing on. He actually was producing some of her demos in the very beginning.
Yeah.
And then she went through a couple different producers. Anyways, to move on, I ended up starting to play with Tony. I ended up playing on his record, which became a Black Sabbath album called Seven Star with Glenn Hughes singing.
Yeah.
That's the first album I ever did. That was my first record. And I ended up joining Black Sabbath, and that caused a rift between Lita and Tony, and all the parties involved. It didn't end the best as it hopefully could have, but hey, that's life,
right.
And I did that for about a year. We did a tour with Glenn Hughes. We only did like 5 or 6 shows with Glenn Hughes, and Glenn was having problems. So then they discovered this singer in New Jersey named Ray Gillen, and he became the singer. We finished out the rest of the touring. We ended up doing another record, which I played drums on, called Eternal Idol. And then we brought Bob Daisley in, who played on, with Rainbow and Ozzy and stuff, and Gary Moore and all that. He played bass, and wrote a lot of the lyrics for the songs. And he was going to join the band, but then we changed management because we used to have Don Arden, the famous Don Arden was the manager, which is Sharon Osbourne's father. And he was he's famous and infamous. But Tony fired him and got a different manager, and things they just gotten kind of disheveled in a big upheaval. And Bob Daisley said, "Hey, Eric, I'm going to go back and play with Gary Moore." He'd been playing with Gary for a few years. Right. So he called me up and said, "Hey, Gary needs a drummer. He can't find anybody. He's auditioned in England, and I told him about you. You should audition. I think this would be good for you to do." So I flew to London, auditioned, got the gig.
Hold on. You got to play with Gary.
Yeah.
How the fuck was that?
Well, it was kind of like I did it all. I mean, I was still in Black Sabbath. So Bob called me up and he goes, "Look, Eric, I'm not going to do the Black Sabbath thing because it's just not, it's too unorganized. And, a lot of times people go, I always say, don't throw out the dirty dishwater until you got clean dishwater." Right. So you don't just get rid of it. He knew he could go back and tour. And so I guess he had auditioned a bunch of guys, but he hadn't found anybody he was happy with. So I flew over. I didn't tell anybody. I flew over there, auditioned, and then I came down to me and another guy, I was told. So they wanted me to come again the next day and learn a couple more songs, which I did. And in those days, you didn't have computers or anything. You had a Walkman, and they gave you a cassette, and you're sitting there, or a CD, and you're sitting in your hotel room with headphones on your leg playing and trying to learn songs that way. That's how I had to learn them. Yep. The new songs. Yep. And but I got the gig, and so I went home, and then I quit Black Sabbath, and I did the Gary Moore tour, which was in '87 for the Wild Frontier album, which they made there's a live concert video for that. If you go on YouTube, there was never an album. There's a lot of live stuff on the B-sides, on singles, or the next record after the war. A lot of the singles he'd put out would have live versions from the previous tour, but there's a live from his stadium, which means Ice Stadium in Swedish. There's that live concert. It's never been released on DVD, but it was. All the video clips are still on YouTube, although they're kind of grainy.
So how was Gary?
Very intense.
Yeah. Very intense.
Was
he was hitting the booze back hard?
No,
back then?
at that time he wasn't drinking at all.
Oh wow!
He was very focused.
Yep.
I mean, he was. Got to remember at that time, we're talking '87. Gary was the Van Halen of Europe. Yeah, he was the guitar hero of Europe.
Yep, for sure.
Bigger than anybody. And we would play 5,000 to 10,000 seaters. We played some. I remember we played in. I think it was Stockholm. We played a 10,000 seater. He was playing bigger places than Prince at the time. Prince was on tour with Sign of the Times tour. I remember because we were in the hotel bar at the Sheraton, and I remember it was like you can walk around the lobby. The bar's in the very center, and it's down a few steps. But you can kind of walk around the whole perimeter, which is kind of part of the lobby. And I remember Prince I was in the bar, and I remember him standing, kind of walking around, and he was standing around with a bodyguard, but he never came in. Yep. I wanted to go talk to him or say something, but I just don't want to bother people, so I let him be. But I wanted to meet him because he's always been one of my favorite musicians. Yep. And our keyboard player, Neil Carter, who also plays in UFO again now. He used to play in UFO.
Oh, okay.
Neil was like one of those. He's the kind of like utility guy. He played guitar, sang lead and great backgrounds, and played keyboards and all that stuff. Yep. And he loved Prince, and he loved that album. We'd always play Sign of the Times all the time, a lot. Yeah. And I don't know if he ever got to meet him, but we were trying to find a way to see the tour, hopefully, on a day off somewhere while we were in Europe, because we were both in Europe at the same time, but it just never happened. Damn. But Gary's pretty intense. I mean, we rehearsed in London for a month. Wow. And at John Henry Studios, and Bob Daisley was playing, the bass player, and Neil, they lived in Brighton, which is a couple hours away or like maybe an hour or so by train. I forget. Yeah. But they'd have to catch the last train by 6 o'clock. So they'd always have to leave rehearsal a little bit early. And Gary's one of those guys that likes to play like forever. The shows would be anywhere from sometimes 2.5 hours. 2:45. Yep. Sometimes a couple, because he would extend the jams and solos on songs if he felt it. Yeah. There was a song called The Loner, and one night I think we played like it was 25 or 30-minute version of it. One song. Yeah, he's just going forever. He'd bring it down, bring it back up, but it was great playing with him because he never runs out of ideas, when he's soloing. His vocabulary is amazing. Like, he can play any kind of style of music if he wants. But his vocabulary for whatever he's doing is really broad. And, he can, some people are not jammers. He's a jammer. Yeah. And after rehearsals, I'd stay and jam with him
Wow.
As we know, the value on those things probably went through the roof.
Through the roof,
and who knows what they're worth now. I know Kirk Hammett owns that '58. I don't know who has the Strat, the Pink Salmon Strat. But those are on the albums like Quarters of Power and Victims of the Future, those are those which Jeff Glicksman, who did all the Kansas albums, he produced those albums. Gary's guitar tones on those albums is the best.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's Glicksman. Glicksman did the 2 Sabbath albums I did.
Oh, okay. So you knew him from that.
Yeah. Well, the ironic thing is, when I did the Sabbath albums, Glenn Hughes was working with Gary Moore, and he had done the one album run for cover. But then they had a falling out. So they got Glenn to come and sing on the Black Sabbath album. And I remember saying to Jeff, man, I want to play with Gary Moore one day. If I ever get a chance to jam with him, I kept always saying that to him because I loved those Victims of the Future and Quarters of Powers albums. So, ironically, Glenn ended up joining Gary Moore, Black Sabbath in '86. January of '87, I'm in Gary Moore's band a year later. It was so weird, and there was another connection there with Cozy Powell, because Cozy Powell and I replaced each other 3 different times in bands. After Black Sabbath, he became the drummer in Black Sabbath. Tony did a couple gigs and with some drummers that did 1 or 2 gigs, but the drummer that was the next drummer in the band was Cozy Powell. And then after I did Gary Moore, I was in a band called Badlands. Cozy Powell was Gary Moore's drummer after me.
So he was right behind you.
But he had also played with Gary in the '70s. Cozy did a couple solo records, and Gary played on those.
How was Gary? How was he with you coming in the band? Was he really demanding on drummers, or he kind of let you go, or he was riding you the whole time? All
the time. Everybody said. I remember the Colin Schofield. He was the Zildjian. He was English, and he knew. Everybody in England knew of course, Gary and the legend of his. He's had a lot of really well-known drummers play with him through the years. Ian Pace, Tommy Aldridge, Cozy Powell, and on and on and on. And so, I knew I was in good company, just getting the gig. But like Colin Schofield said to me after I did the tour, he goes, "Eric, you got to give yourself credit. You survived the whole tour. You survived Gary Moore." And he was saying it jokingly, but he meant it like, he goes, everyone knows the he fired Ian Pace of Deep Purple when they were doing Victims of the Future album.
Wow.
Because he wasn't happy the way he was playing. And Ian Pace talked about it in Modern Drummer magazine, said, I was having problems, and, he was saying that he understood why they replaced him with Bobby Chenard from Billy Squire's band. And then Bobby Chenard ended up doing the tour. And that when they opened for Rush, I think it was, or Queen, I forget which tour it was. But he was very intense. I'll never forget one time we were doing a gig. Now, mind you, he would extend solos. So if a solo section was normally 12 bars, it might be 112 bars one night. So, my dad always taught me as a kid, when you're playing drums, you need to, you're not just foundational, but you need to support like the soloist. So if somebody's playing phrases and stuff, you need to catch some of their licks and phrases and phrase with them and, support it. Like a big band drummer. So I've always approached my drumming as kind of like from a big band drummer's perspective. You support vocal and guitar lines and stuff. And, I play more off the guitar than I do actually off the bass, to be honest with you. I always did. And it comes from my dad telling me, to listen to the lead instrument and the singers. So I'm following Gary one night, and he's doing some stuff. And I'll admit, I wasn't all that experienced, I'll be honest with you, at the time. So one time I'm playing, I guess I did some lick and he didn't like it. Sometimes it's like he wanted you to have a certain amount of ability or chops, but not necessarily use it.
Right.
And so I'm following him. I did some lick, and also he turns around. And he just turns around me with like evil look. He goes, "Fuck off," and And he turned on like, it was like scary. But I was used to it because I played with my dad for 10 years, and my dad was tough.
Right.
My dad was just like that. My dad used to kick me off the drums when I was a kid and say, "You're not playing it right, I'm going to show you how to do it." So I had grown some thick skin by that point, but I do remember kind of going like, "Oh," I wanted to disappear behind the drums because, he never said anything after it, but I realized that, he's just like there was one song called it was the opening song on Wild Frontier. Over the Hills and Far Away. The song Over the, which is like a 6/8.
Yep.
Kind of Irish, kind of a shuffly thing.
Yep.
But that whole record was done with programmed drums. There were some real drums overlaid by a studio drummer, but it's all programmed drum machines.
Okay.
And so some of that stuff, to play it physically as a human drummer, you kind of had to figure out, well, what part am I going to emphasize more, because there's more going on than four limbs. So I remember that song's like, and he wanted it all with one hand. I would cheat it and be going like this way, almost like doubled up, like how you play disco beats, but it's in 6/8, so it's triplet feel. And he's like, and I get it, you can feel the difference, but sometimes it took dexterity, and you had to learn how to play that. So there's times where, until I could get it up to speed, I would sometimes, he'd be looking at me, so I'd be like going, and as soon as he'd turn around, I'd go, and he'd look at me, and I'd be back to like this. So I found ways to kind of get around it sometimes.
Yep.
But he was, literally, he would tell you sometimes verbatim what he wanted.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with that, because ultimately I'm there to play for the band, play for the song, play for the artist. I think when Cozy Powell came in after me, they did the record, and Bob Daisley told me the story. He goes, "Eric, I told Gary when he first hired Cozy, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think you guys are, you're going to butt heads," because he knew Cozy's the kind of guy that's going to say, "You hired Cozy Powell, this is how I play. Don't tell me how to play." But Bob said, "Oh, it was the opposite. When they made the record, it was great, it all worked out." He goes, "But when we got into rehearsals for the tour and they had to play other material, when Gary started telling him how to play,
he didn't like it.
He fired him."
Yeah.
And then I got a call from Gary at that time, but I was on tour with Paul Stanley doing a solo tour. And he called me, he's saying he needed a drummer, but he ended up hiring Chris Slade. And I wouldn't have been able to do it anyways, because I was in Badlands. We had just started the band, and I was doing Paul's tour in the beginning of the year.
Right.
While we were waiting to finish the record, and then I went on tour with Badlands in Japan starting in June, and then that was that. But ironically, I met Cozy. I met him briefly when he came to one of the Hammersmith Odeon shows with Gary Moore. So that was a big deal for me, because I was a big fan of his, and he's one of my heroes. And then he played in Brian May's band, and so I went to see him at the Palace with Brian May in I think it was '93 or '94, whatever it was, '93 or '94. And I hung out with him after, and he was really cool. And he gave me, I remember, I always felt good because he gave me a nice compliment. He goes, when I had to learn your parts for Gary, he goes, "You did some stuff that," he goes, "it was pretty tricky." He goes, "It was really good stuff." He goes, "Really good stuff, mate." So I remember feeling like, I felt like like a kid in a candy store. He made me feel so good giving me a compliment. And ironically, he was Brian May's drummer. And then when he did the next record in '98, he got killed in a car accident, and I auditioned, and I replaced him in Brian May's band.
Oh, you played with Brian May too?
Yeah. So I did. So that's why I said Cozy and I followed each other in three different bands.
Wow. So getting back to Gary, what was the hang like after shows? And that was he a hang kind of guy or not really?
Yeah, he was always really nice. I got along good with him. He had a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
The guys in the band were all, because Gary was smart. The management, they got guys with the right personalities that weren't confrontational.
Yeah. Were
good players at a high level, good caliber, and everybody knew their roles and knew their place, and nobody had drug or alcohol issues. And Gary he wasn't drinking or doing anything then. He was very driven, focused on his career. And that record was very successful. We played very big places until we got to America.
Yeah.
And then America, we were just doing clubs. And he was not happy.
Wow.
He never toured America again after that. That was the last tour he ever did in America. It was '87, the one I did with him. He only did 2 other shows, I think. He played on the Letterman show, but he did one show at Universal when he started doing the blues stuff, and I think a show in New York, and that's it. He never did a tour in America after that, 87. He was always, I think, very mad and disappointed because he was such a guitar hero over there.
Huge.
And over here, you know, we'd play gigs. Every time we do a gig, it'd be like, you know, Michael Schenker and Uli Roth, all those kind of guys would come. All the musicians would come to the gigs to see him play. It was he was a musician's musician.
Yeah.
So, but we were playing all like, I mean, we'd sell out the clubs, but we're playing clubs. And he was very unhappy about that. And I think that's what made him never come back here again.
Wow.
I will never forget, we did one show, we did a couple shows. We were opening for like Ace Frehley and Y&T.
Yeah.
And I remember he was talking to the crowd between songs, and he said, I'll never forget this. He goes, yeah, there's a lot of opening acts on the bill tonight. And that was like that was a dig, because he was opening for these bands. None of those bands, they'd all been opening for him if we were in Europe.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah, he must have been pissed.
He was definitely pissed.
I mean, he's become, he was such a legend back then, but a bigger legend now because we've lost him. But fuck, man, what a player.
Amazing.
Monster.
I mean, he was so good. I have to say he was the best. I mean, my favorite I ever played with was Brian May, because I love Queen. That's my favorite band. I love Queen. I love Brian's tone, and he's such a nice guy. I love playing, you know, you imagine you're a big Queen fan, you get to play Queen songs with Brian May. I mean, forget it. But I felt the same way about Gary.
Yeah. So how do you go from Gary Moore to Brian May?
Well, I was in between there. I was in a band called Badlands with Jake E. Lee from Ozzy's band.
Yeah.
And I did the first record and the first tour, but then we had a falling out. Those guys kicked me out of the band. And literally the week that I got fired, I just called everybody I knew in the business and said, I'm looking for a gig. And Doug Goldstein, who used to be our security guard with Black Sabbath, was now working with... he was co-managing Great White, and he became Guns N' Roses manager eventually. Right. But he was working for the management with Alan Niven, and I called him up. I go, hey, I'm looking for a gig. He goes, hey, I'm out with Great White. We're opening for Alice Cooper. Alice needs a drummer. I'll tell him about you. So I got an audition. Literally a week after I got fired, I auditioned for Alice, and I got the gig. Alice was, at that time, Poison was a top 10 hit. He had a platinum album. I was in his band, and boom. And I did his next two tours, 90 and 91.
All right, hold it, man. You were living the ultimate rock and roll dream at one of the ultimate times, which obviously kind of doesn't exist like that anymore. But
no.
You were right amongst the biggest of the big.
Well, yeah, there's times where, and the irony of it all, to me, I always look back, every band that I played in, all the people I played with, I was a fan of them. I mean, I remember when I first heard Lita Ford, I was in the local band, my first band, and I heard it on the radio all the time, this song, Gotta Let Go, and I go, wow, this, because I liked hard rock, this is really good, I love this stuff. A friend of mine worked at her label, I go, man, I'd like to play with Lita Ford. He goes, oh, she's got a really great drummer, and that was Randy Castillo.
Yep.
Well, lo and behold, later that year, like 6 months later, I'm her drummer. So, and then I loved Black Sabbath as a kid. Next thing you know, I'm playing with Tony.
Black Sabbath.
You know, so, and that was, you know, unfortunately, I wish I was more experienced at the time working with Tony. You know, I loved playing with him because I love all those heavy riffs. I mean, nobody writes better heavy riffs than that guy.
Yep.
But I didn't know anything about the business. I didn't really know anything about anything. I was just kind of making it up as I go along, kind of a thing.
Were you having those moments? I know I've had these where it's just like, fuck, man, I've made it. I've a childhood dream. How many moments did you have getting to play with these people? It must have been like...
Well, I've never been a person that, like I always tell my friends, when I was a kid, I never wanted to try to go early to hang out, to try to meet the band or go to hotels. And I just never was that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I had posters on my wall and I bought records incessantly and I bought every rock magazine. I mean, I always just felt like I don't want to hang out with them. I want to be them. I want to do what they're doing.
Yeah.
So maybe my mindset was different from the get-go. I don't know.
So it wasn't like fanboy. It was, you want to play. It was all about the music.
I know it's easy to say now, but I swear to God, I always thought, you're going to do this. You're supposed to do this. This is what you're supposed to do. You're going to be in a band. Awesome. And you're going to do this. And then, I'll be honest with you, by the time I was like, say, 23, 24, I was really disillusioned because I was miserable. I was in a marriage that didn't work out and unhappy and all that. And I started thinking like, all right, you know, sometimes if change, you don't make change, it's forced upon you. Yep. And I just realized change was then forced upon me. I got really focused and I moved out here, and this was the prime time to be here, the end of '83.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, I was seeing it blowing up from Cleveland when you know, Van Halen, of course, was big, but you saw Randy Rhoads with Ozzy, and then all of a sudden Quiet Riot and Doc and Motley Crue, all these bands from LA blowing up. I got here right when I got here, Motley Crue, they weren't like an arena band yet. They were playing like Santa Monica Civic.
Right, okay.
So they were just blowing up.
So you were here at the height of the rock and roll
of that era.
Yeah, and like Sunset Strip must have been nuts, right?
Every night was like Mardi Gras. That's what I tell people. It was literally like every Friday and Saturday night was like walking almost like Mardi Gras in New Orleans. I mean, the streets were packed up and down either side of the street. Girls were dressed to the nines.
Yep.
Every band would be out there pimping their band. You know, they have flyers printed out, trying to pass them on or give away tickets or whatever. And at the end of the night, the ground would be littered with all that stuff. Well, then they started passing city ordinances that you couldn't do that. Yep. And of course, if you flyered, they know it was you because you're on the picture.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Because bands used to go around and put it all over the telephone poles and street lights and all that. They made it illegal to do that. So eventually that whole thing went by the wayside. But it was a great time to kind of be right in the thick of things.
Yeah.
And sometimes you could go down there if you got a good parking spot right out in front of like the Rainbow or the Roxy or Gazzari's and those clubs. You could just sit out and sit on your car all night and just, you know, people watch and hang out. It was like a really fun, great scene. It's a shame that there isn't that music scene anymore like that.
Yeah, man, nothing like that. I mean, we watch it in the movies now. Like, God, that would have been so cool to be in that day. Yeah,
I feel kind of fortunate. And I got to tell you, somehow I figured it out. I assimilated. I always felt like I could adapt really easily and assimilate to musical and people situations, and that's what I did.
Well, it sounds like to me that you obviously had a personality too that could fit into any situation, and you knew how to play that game as well. Like, well, not to piss off the artists and
but I think it's like all things in life. Sometimes you have to, you know, there's our manager Doc McGee always says stay in your lane, but I think sometimes you have to know what you do and know what you don't do.
Yeah.
Know what you're there to do, what your responsibilities are. Look, if you start a band with like-minded people and you start off all together, you decide it's going to be a complete, equal democracy and all that, that's a different scenario. Bands that started from, you know, baby bands and then made it, like Kiss or Van Halen, some of those bands, Queen, it's a different dynamic.
Yeah.
Once you start changing members, you have to realize it's a business to them. They've established a business and a certain point of view of how they want to conduct business and what they want to do. And you can't come in and start trying to say, well, I want to do it this way. You know, there's an old saying, if you want to do it different, go start your own band.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you're going to work with people or for people, I think you have to know what your place is and know your role.
Yeah.
And it's not about being a yes man or just passive. It's about being smart and going, hey, they hired me to be the drummer because they think I can play drums and sing, and I have the right attitude and personality, and I get how they want to do things.
Yeah.
And I know my place, and I know to stay in my lane and do what I'm there to do.
Yep.
And if you do that, I always take the attitude, make things work for you, not against you.
Yeah.
If you really want to do things your own way, there's no rewards in going, oh, I sure told them, and I told people to go screw themselves. Or it's like, that's just going to get you unemployed or out of work.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, unless you're a songwriter and you got all the goods, I mean, you can write great tunes and sing them, and then you can control more of the dialogue of what you want to do musically. But if you're not that guy, which I'll be the first to admit that I'm not.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what I can do and I know what I bring to a situation, but I also know what I don't do.
Right. So get back to Brian May. I mean, man, by far one of the best players on the planet.
Oh,
and super intelligent guy, right? Like the guy's...
And a really cool guy, too. Really nice.
Really nice, yeah.
Super nice.
So how long were you with Brian playing? And you're playing all the Queen stuff, too, right?
Yeah, and his solo stuff. He had his second solo at the time called Another World. And so he did a cattle call of drummers. And I flew over to London. I was still playing with Alice Cooper. I was filling in because Alice's drummer at the time left to go fill in to help out with Megadeth. So they asked me if I could play drums to fill in. But I already had auditioned for Brian. I knew I was going to do the tour.
Yep.
But I knew it wasn't going to start for a few months. So I flew over to London. I didn't tell anybody. It was another situation. I didn't tell anybody. Ironically, how I found out, I was doing some of these KISS fan convention or expos as like a guest over in Europe. And one of the fans told me, I think we were in Spain. He goes, "Hey, Eric, I heard Brian May on the radio today saying he needs a drummer." And I knew Cozy Powell had died. He was doing like a press jaunt and kind of doing like a unplugged acoustic type stuff. And Steve Ferroni was playing drums, the guy that played Average White Band and Tom Petty. Yep. But I guess Brian didn't think he was like the right rock. You know, Brian's a rock guitar player. Yeah. He wants a guy that's, you know, Roger Taylor, Cozy Powell, those are rock drummers. Steve Ferroni's a great drummer, but he's not like a hard rock power drummer in that style of music per se. Yep. And I guess Brian wanted more of a rock drummer. So I flew over and auditioned, and then they called me like on a Monday after I got back and said, "Oh, Brian, you know, Brian wants you to do the tour." And he got on the phone, and it's funny because, you know, I always, like you said, sometimes how do you get like not like overwhelmed or starstruck? I always thought you got to kind of keep yourself, you know, act like you've been there and just be a regular guy, because you know, you can, you know, a lot of times I look back on some of these things and go, wow, that's really cool that I got to do that. But in the moment, I try to just keep my head level and just kind of get down to business. So I don't think I was trying to be too cool, but when Brian got on the phone, he goes, "Oh, okay, it'll be great. I look forward to playing." They go, "Okay, cool," you know. And later on, a couple years later, we were doing, they were doing that Queen musical in the West End when they had just started We Will Rock You. Yep. And they were doing some promo for it. So I was going over there and playing drums for him, and sometimes with Roger as double drummers with Roger Taylor. Yep. And they were, my friend, he works for KISS now as one of our, like, he does a lot of PR and social media stuff, this guy Keith LaRue. And Keith was a big fan of Brian May and Queen, so he came over to see me play at, we played at Royal Albert Hall. I think he came to that gig. Then we had this party, and we were doing promo for We Will Rock You, and a lot of celebrities there and stuff like that. And so Keith's hanging out, talking to this, I think it was after Royal Albert Hall. Right. Because I remember we were in the bar, and Keith's talking to Brian. He's going, "Oh, when Eric got the gig, he was so excited. Queen's, you're his favorite guitar player. Queen's his favorite brand." Brian goes, "Really?" He goes, "I'm so glad you told me." He goes, "When I called him up to tell him that he got the gig, he almost seemed like he didn't care." It was like, so there's where you go. You got to be careful. It's that fine line of trying to be too cool or too calm, you know, calm and collective, as they say. Yeah. But I was trying not to be the fanboy. Yeah, of course. You know, because I was such a big Queen fan. Yeah. But that, to me, I will say that is always going to be one of my biggest highlights ever, to get to play with him. And then I got to play with Roger also. Roger was doing some TV show, and I flew over there to play drums for him because he was singing. You know, he's a great singer. Yeah. And I remember we did "Jealous Guy" by John Lennon, and I forget what other songs we did, but he sang and I just played drums. Oh, man. And then we did a couple gigs where they actually did it as Queen. When they wanted to start coming back and doing gigs as Queen, John Deacon wouldn't do it. So they were using sometimes Neil Murray, he played in Brian's solo band. He was in Whitesnake and Gary Moore, a lot of other bands. Great bass player. And we did this gig for Queen's Day in Amsterdam. And so Roger and Brian were both singing, and they had a couple other singers. Paul Thompson sang, who used to be in Mike and the Mechanics, and he's the one that sang, you know, "Blinded by the Light," Man for Man, that guy, that voice. Wow. He was the singer also. And so I played drums, and a couple times we did double drummers. So I did a few gigs, like a Nelson Mandela thing in South Africa in 2003 or 4. One of those Nelson Mandela things, and so I got to play drums with, I got to play with the Eurythmics and Beyonce. I'm trying to remember who else I played drums for. Oh, Edge and Bono. You did? So I played a couple, which was kind of funny because at first they weren't sure if they wanted to play with the band. They wanted to play acoustically. Right. And so we were rehearsing down there for like 2 weeks for this whole big festival. And they had a lot of South African artists as well. So they had a drummer that would play with all the South African artists, and then I played with all the kind of Western music bands and stuff. You know, what was her name? That other girl, Anastasia. Yeah, Anastasia. I played with her too. So And Beyonce had her own band as well, but I played a couple things where she sang like a duet thing, and I played drums for that. And but I got to play. I'm trying to remember what I remember. We played "Sweet Dreams" and
with the Rhythmics.
With the Rhythmics, Annie Lennox and
Dave Stewart.
Dave Stewart.
Yeah.
They came down, and I remember we rehearsed in this soccer stadium the night before. I remember it's going dun 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 dun, and Annie Lennox turned around to me when I hit those drums. She just turned around and gave me a big smile because it was so powerful. Because I think they're not used to. Usually they don't have like harder hitting rock drummers doing their gigs. It's usually they're great drummers, but they're more studio style type drummers, if you will. She was really nice, and she was amazing. Even when she came out to sing and do the rehearsals, even Beyonce and Anastasia came out and were standing outside watching her because she was. I've
seen her at the bowl, man.
She was like, wow.
She's fucking amazing.
Wow.
She blew Sting off the stage.
Yeah,
she was incredible.
I mean, and this was rehearsal, and they're all. I mean, Beyonce was a big deal. That was when she was solo and big deal. And what's the name? Was there two Cat Stevens, Yusuf? He goes by whatever.
Yep.
Yusuf Islam or something. I think that's his name. And that other guy from Spain or Italy, he's kind of like a crooner kind of guy. I forget his name. He's got a one-word name. I know Brian and Roger played on his record.
Right.
And I kind of had a difficulty with him because he wanted Brian and Roger to play with him at the thing.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to play with the guys from Queen.
Yeah.
Which everybody always does.
Right.
And Ryan agreed to do it, but Roger's like, I don't want to play with him. And Brian's like, fuck. I remember Brian going, fuck him. And,
was it Enrique?
No. It was.
All right, we're going to stop it there. We're going to come back to Eric next week. It's some good stories, man. It's when rock and roll was rock and roll, baby, back in the day when, he was doing it big time. But anyway, lots of great more stories coming with Eric. Be safe. Come back to us next week. Guitar Wank. We're working on a new website, working on new things. So we're not dead in the water yet. We're still around. We're just reevaluating. So I've got a few things in the pipeline. If you've ordered merch, you're going to have to hang on for a little bit because we are in the process of getting new merchandise and new basically connections there. But as Bruce said, he's doing the videos, and we'll be back with more stuff. So we'll see you all next week. Keep an eye out for when we release these videos, because these podcasts, because they're kind of all over the place at the moment. And but we're getting them out as we can. Okay, guys, be safe. Take care, and we hope you and your family are doing fantastic in these crazy times, and we will see you all next time. Thank you for listening. Catch you later.
it.